I'm Peter Eisenman. I'm 89 years old. I'm the oldest teaching, practicing architect in the world. I still teach full-time at Yale, and I still have a practice that was closed down for COVID, but we're hoping to reopen. I'm still doing the three things that I love: is teaching, writing, and building. And Manfredo Tafuri once said to me that if you don't build, nobody will care what you teach. And I think he's right. So it's really important for young architects to, if they're going to teach, is to build. And I've always been very lucky in terms of the kinds of projects that we've had to do. I'm having a big exposition of my unbuilt work in China, in Beijing, next summer, sponsored by a series of young architects, young Chinese architects who happen to be very bright. And it should be a really interesting exhibition. I think exhibitions are important, just like books or buildings. They represent certain things at certain times. So here I am. I hope to be teaching another 2 years at Yale, retire when I'm 91, and I think it's a good time to stop and just build and write. I've got a couple of books I'm working on right now, and a couple of projects which are on hold, which will keep me busy for another few years. So anyway, there I am. I was born in New Jersey, in Newark, New Jersey, on the 11th of August in 1932. I was born actually in a hospital in Newark. My parents lived in East Orange, New Jersey, and then they moved when I was a young person to South Orange, where I went to high school. I went to college at Cornell, passionate about being a Cornellian. Cynthia and my son went to Cornell in the hotel school. I was in the architecture school. By the way, you met Cynthia the other day. Cynthia Davidson's my wife of 30 plus years. And she's a great companion, a great buddy, and a great mother. I've always been a New Yorker. When you grow up in New Jersey, you always have New York envy. And to me, it was, I can't practice architecture in New Jersey. And the kind of architecture that I do is specifically, you need a big city. And when I started my work, I went to Cornell. Then I went in the Army for 2 years. I came back. I went to work for 3 years to get my professional registration. And then I went back to graduate school to get my master's degree. I went to Columbia to graduate school. Then I won a fellowship to go to the University of Cambridge. And when I arrived in Cambridge, I had done a competition which we did very well in, the Liverpool Cathedral competition. And when I got there, the professor, the head of the school, said, did I ever teach? And I said, no. And he said, you want to teach? I said, sure. So I started teaching by accident the first year at Cambridge. And then when I got done the first year, he said, we want you to stay. And I said, well, I want to be an architect. He said, well, you can't do that here, but you can do a PhD. So I did the formal basis of modern architecture, which is something I still live by today and is something that started my career both as an academic and as a teacher and as an architect. And I was lucky then to go back to Princeton, and we won a few competitions and did a couple of houses. And got an exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art, which was very critical. Was working with Michael Graves, so it's a long narrative, but was very productive, and I wouldn't be anywhere but New York. If you said where else would I be, I could possibly be in Berlin. I could possibly be in Milano or Londra. I was in England for 3 years and I enjoyed living there. I don't think I could be in Rome or Paris or Venice, maybe Madrid, but there are very few cities. I don't like Los Angeles. Cynthia and I were married in Chicago, so I could basically live in Chicago, but New York is a really very seductive place, and I teach at Yale. Cynthia and I have a house outside of New Haven, and we spend half our life there and half our life in New York City. So we have the best of both worlds. We have the country, and we have a pond right next to our house is built over a mill pond. We have a waterfall. We have wonderful trees. And it's really, especially this time of year, the colors. And we have a small pied-à-terre in New York, 1 bedroom in New York, near the Museum of Modern Art. So we're here part-time and in New Haven part-time. I always wanted to be an architect. There's a difference. I changed from wanting to be a building architect to being a thinking architect. And I didn't realize that you could be a thinking architect and have as much, let's say, power in the profession as I had. Being a building architect was at one level, but being a thinking architect incorporated building and writing and teaching. So to me, that was important. I mean, but I didn't wait that. I mean, I waited long to have my own practice, but by the time I had my own practice in '82, I had already built several houses, I had several major exhibitions, I'd done major projects. So I wasn't like most architects starting doing kitchen and garage renovations. I was doing major projects and was invited to major competitions. So we won several major competitions, and I was, doing what I considered to be fairly interesting work. And I don't do commercial work, and I don't do just professional work. I'm a different kind of architect. We have a project now that's on hold that we did a schematic for of 2,000 units in the country of Georgia. I've never done a project as large as 2,000 housing units, a big project. And an interesting project. And if it weren't interesting, we wouldn't be doing it. I'm just not interested in just building for the sake of building. I'm interested in building ideas. And building ideas and teaching ideas are really important. So fundamental are ideas about architecture and the kinds of things I write, kinds of things I talk about, lecture on, are ideas about architecture, and started way back when I built my first building, actually, when I was in the Army a year after I got out of school. So that, not nothing. And the first house that I did was in 1963, was less than 10 years after getting out of school. And I had worked for Walter Gropius's office in Boston. I'd won a competition. So I was doing detailed work on buildings as soon as I got out of the Army, which was, when in the Army, the 10 days after I graduated from Cornell in 1955. I got out in 57. I went to work right away. I designed quite a number of buildings between 57 and 59. I went back to school in 59, went to Cambridge in 60. So I started big-time teaching in 60 and competitions. In 63, I came back to Princeton. So 63 was only 8 years after I graduated from college. So it wasn't that long a time. It was pretty condensed. And in 63, I started building buildings. There was a professor at Columbia named Percival Goodman, not a very good architect, who I had gone to work for and convinced me to come to study at Columbia as opposed to MIT, where I was headed, let's say. And Percy was really significant character in my life. And he encouraged me to go to England, helped me win a scholarship to go to Cambridge. Was always really important in my early life. And at Cambridge, then I met Colin Rowe, who was one of the most important historical, theoretical minds of the second half of the 20th century in Western world. I include Banham, Rowe, and Tafuri as the three important historian theoreticians. And Rowe and I traveled together for 2 years. I learned an enormous amount from Colin. And then I became friendly with Manfredo Tafuri in my years at England and afterward. And he wrote a couple of essays on my work, which were very important to me. So he was an important figure. And then I met Jacques Derrida, the philosopher, and we did a project together and a book together. And I became very influenced by deconstruction and deconstructed and thought. And I'm doing a course this coming spring at Yale on deconstruction and how it was involved with architecture and why it was involved in architecture. So those things, I've carried those things from working on ideas in practice and working on things in teaching and then in publishing.
And also you mentioned before that you worked with Michael Graves.
Yeah, I did.
It was also an important period of time? Or what?
Well, Michael and I were, at the beginning, were a pair. We supported each other at Princeton. When we went up for tenure at the university, this is what split us apart. Michael received the tenure and I didn't, and I wasn't going to stay in a situation where we were unequal. So that's when I started the Institute in New York, which was very important, with the Museum of Modern Art. And then Michael and I split apart, and he became more of a postmodernist, and we remained friendly throughout the rest of our lives, but his life especially. But I don't think Michael influenced me. We worked together, we taught together, we thought together. It was, I don't think I necessarily influenced him. I think we were colleagues together rather than, I would say that Tafuri and Rowe and Derrida and Goodman influenced me. I think I was very interested. We did a book on Aldo Rossi when I was at the Institute. We did a book on Moneo. I was very close to Aldo and Moneo. I've always been very close to a lot of architects. Arati Sozaki, we were close. But I don't think my colleagues were the influences were people older than myself, and I think Rowe and Tafuri were two of the most important theoretical Western minds in the late 20th century. And I was fortunate to have them as colleagues. And I said this to my students the other day. We were looking at the work of Raffaello, the Italian painter and architect, and he's done a project which was not complete called the Villa Madama. And I said to my kids, I said, you got to remember these things, and you got to go and see these things and use them as precedents for your work. I said, if you don't know these great projects, then you're just a tourist in architecture. And I said, you don't want to do that. I said, you got to know, you can't be an architect without knowing precedent. And you got to know what Raphael, even the Villa Madama, none of them had ever heard of it. I said, and you won't. If you're a tourist, you'll never see it, but you got to go and find somebody to take you to see Villa Madama. It's important. And then it's important to see Santa Maria della Pace in Rome by Bramante, and to see the Church of Alberti in Mantua. I said, there are these things that you have to see and know. You have to know how to draw the plan of the Palazzo Te in Mantua by Giulio Romano. I said, these are things, and the reason why I'm teaching is so that I can expose you to what is necessary to be an architect. And these things, you can't be an architect, for example, from Peru and not go and see great works, whether they're what the Incans did in Peru, whether they're the Mayans in Mexico, whether they're the modernists in Buenos Aires or Chile or Uruguay. You just can't stay in Peru. And it's the same for anybody. They have to get out. In the United States, there's not that much architecture. You have to go either to South America or to Japan and in China or to Europe. I happen to be more Eurocentric, so but there's no question that they have to know these things. They have to know them. The books on their test have to be memorized practically. I mean, if you see all the books in this office, they're books that I use. And you can't just, listen to YouTube or whatever. You got to be and go and see things. You got to draw them. You got to know how to draw a plan of the Villa Madama. What's important about it? These are things that I teach my students, and I'm very strict about making sure that they get to have that information. Without it, how do you design anything? If I have a piece of paper and somebody says, design a house is not architecture. The plan of a house can be any number of ways. Making it architecture and making that architecture a conscious gesture is really important. And that's what distinguishes building and living from art. And I think all cultures demand art as a component of their existence. And architecture is a component of Western culture. And to me, it's important that the students know that everything they do is part of the culture, and enables the culture, and the culture enables the architects. So it's a reciprocal relationship. Well, buildings and construction are supposed to be about living. Living isn't necessarily what culture is. Culture is an aspect of living, and living in architecture is like living with paintings or living with music. I mean, some people have hi-fi equipment in their houses and they listen constantly to great music. That's part of being alive, but it isn't the function of a house to provide that. It's not the function of a house to provide architecture or painting or sculpture or literature. There are many aspects of culture that are important. And to me, architecture is one of them. Some people want music, and it has nothing to do with the function of the house. It has something to do with the spirit of the house. And how do you get that spirit, and how do you make things come together so that you feel a disturbance in the room, let's say, or in the space? And I mean, I was with one of my former students on Saturday, and he was talking about geometry. And I said, you know, geometry is about lines and planes and points. I said, architecture isn't. It's about space and time and thickness. No, there are no lines in architecture. You can't have a point because there's no water protection, no air protection. You got to have this. And the minute you have this, you have thickness. And I said, the difference between architecture and geometry is thickness. And I said, I'm not interested in geometry at all. I'm interested in thickness and how architecture takes up the poche. For example, what makes St. Peter's a great church is the poche, the fact that you don't need those size columns to hold the thing up. What you need is a little column and then the thickness to make the space. And to me, thickness is what distinguishes architecture from function, from geometry, from all of the things, because there's no other discipline that demands thickness. Painting doesn't. Painting wants thinness. Sculpture, sometimes. But architecture is very interesting. It's a very different condition than painting or sculpture. Kids today are being taught that the most important thing about architecture is the experience of people. You can't design experience. Architecture is not about experience. It's not about phenomenology. Is all about experience, about material, etc. Thickness isn't about material. Thickness is a state of material being. It's not the material itself. Phenomenology is the material. I'm interested in the state of the material, not the material itself. So I am totally against the phenomenological school, the experiential school, the being school. And that's where much architecture and much teaching is today. And the student doesn't know the difference between material being and thickness. And material is a phenomena of being in the present. Thickness has nothing to do with being in the present. And that's sort of a watchword of how I see architecture and what I teach. And it's very this. And to me, if you don't feel this, when I do this, I feel there's something here that's holding this apart. That's thickness. It's not the color of my hands or the shape or the feel of my hands. It's what's in here. I'm teaching at Yale. I teach postmodernism now. I used to teach modernism, but I feel in order to go beyond where we are, we have to know what postmodern. So I try and show them what is something that's not modern and why is it postmodern. So we are going through that. My four architects, my postmodern architects are Sterling, Rossi, Ungers, Venturi. They're the four. And then the next generation is Isozaki, Koolhaas, Gehry, myself, Moneo, etc. What are we? Well, we're not postmodern, but we're not digital either. Then Mario Carpo talks about the first digital age and the second digital age. I don't know about that. I'm not sure where we are. I know that people like Greg Lynn and Pier Vittorio Aureli are important figures in the next generation, but I don't know quite where they stand. We were in the 70s, the late 60s and 70s, an ideological dispute between the phenomenologists and the rationalists, let's say, between Venturi and myself, or Venturi and Corbu. There's no such contest today because nobody is anywhere. And I think what you'll find is very few people can authorize, let's say, a state of thought, a condition of thought. If you said to me, what do you believe in today? I think I'm still a rationalist. I still believe in rational as opposed to experiential, as opposed to expression, as opposed, I always thought that you needed to have more people who understood, i.e. reason, than who could experience or feel something or express. And I didn't feel that individual expression was a good idea. It leads to popular revolt and chaos and God knows what is happening. But I don't think there's anything in architecture that is challenging the world of culture. I don't know where architecture is, but I know it's no longer postmodern. It's no longer modern. I don't think it's really the digital, and I don't know quite what it is. But I'm working. That's why I continue to teach. And I wrote a book last year called Lateness about the idea that there was no real presence, that presence was always either about the past or about the future, but never about the present. And lateness was a present that was late, that was not avant-garde, nor derrière-garde, but outside of itself. And it's an interesting little book. You may not have seen it. It's about 100 pages. It's a little bit of thinking where I am today. I'm also working on where is the rational today. And, I teach these things. I lecture every week. I'm lecturing on Venturi this week. I lectured last week on Sterling. I'm also lecturing. I do 2 lectures a week, one on Raphael and Michelangelo, and one on Sterling and Venturi. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead. Thanks. My main motivation, it's become clearer, is reason. And it's not so much the formal as I started with the formal. The formal is basically reason in space and time. So I would say I've evolved. I'm not as dogmatic, as didactic, as encumbered with belief. I'm still searching. I don't know if I can ever find it. But I've written many books, but never the book. But my position is evolving as I grow older. And I still believe I don't believe in the modern anymore. I don't believe in the postmodern. I believe they existed. I don't believe in the being of today as necessarily having to be modern or postmodern or whatever today is. I think we can be late, as I've written. We don't have to be early. We don't have to be in front. We can be in the back. So we'll see. I mean, That's a change from where I was, but the world has changed. Don't forget. I mean, I think that the need for culture is terribly important. The need for architecture is terribly important. I mean, we used to build for the city of New York. I built housing projects for the city of New York. Young architects don't get a chance to build for the city of New York anymore. They don't care. The city. They just have developers build, not young architects. So it's a difference in the culture. And I think that's why where we are is the culture has changed enormously. We're in a post-liberal, I don't know how to say it, post, I'll just leave it. We're in some post something. I'm not sure where. I don't think there's one way. I think there are many possible ways to be a teacher. I don't think working as a developer is interesting for architecture. It's good for building. If you want to just build, most people don't really care about art, culture, music. They don't. Why should they? Don't care about literature. So don't worry about them. If you want one client that wants to do a house that's architecture, that's enough, right? Do one. But don't work just for a developer or a city planner or whatever, just so that you build. That's not worthwhile. And you have to have, before you build, you have to have an idea. If you don't have an idea, like I said to you, I don't know what is the idea I want to build. I know the idea I want is post-rational. What is post-rational? Well, it retains, I just wrote it this morning, retains the mysterious in the rational. What does that mean? What is the rational that's also mysterious? It's in here, but what does it look like? So if you said to me, we'll give you a house to do in Peru, what would it look like? I don't think I know. And just because the teachers need to build, I'm a good teacher. It doesn't matter if I'm building or not. I don't think we should prescribe what an individual should do. You do what, nobody told you to do this. You got into it, you did it. It wasn't what you were set to do or taught to do. Here you are. So I think that's a way to live, as a way of bouncing around. Look at all the people you meet. If you didn't have this camera, you wouldn't have met my wife, you wouldn't have met me, you wouldn't have met a lot of people. The question is, what do you do with it? And how much do you learn from it? And how much do you learn from listening to monkeys like me speaking? And who chooses the monkeys, right? And how do you know that you're not missing the better monkeys? You have to think, what is it I'm trying to do? What am I learning? What is somebody learning listening to Peter Eisenman about this? That's what's important. What's it important for a student in Peru that what Peter's talking about? I have no idea. All I know is don't work for a developer. That's for sure. Don't do a kitchen renovation. That's another thing. It's a waste of time. Installations are different. They're small-scale architecture projects. You can do an installation. I'm going to do an installation in my exhibition in China because I can't build a real building, so I'll do an installation. See, I think what architecture is about is being architecture and speaking to the people so they, not consciously, but subconsciously, so they know what it is. We don't need to lecture them. We need to make examples, and they say, hey, this is different. I like it. I don't know why I like it. That's what I'm interested in. I don't need to tell them why they should like it. I think I want them to experience liking it against what they expected. So I'm not interested in teaching non-architects. My barber, my doctor, I don't want to tell people what, I just do what I do. They can take it or not. And the other last
The
question.
last question is, what do you think it was the hardest thing to learn or to do for you?
To move from wanting to be a professional builder to being a cultural thinker. That was to realize, I could be as important as a cultural thinker as a professional builder. When I learned that set me free.